In the sweltering summer of 1716, 14 of colonial South Carolina's wealthiest plantation owners gathered for a routine meeting at the Grayfield estate. They never left. 3 days later, authorities discovered their charred remains arranged in a perfect circle around a massive coal furnace, their hands bound in iron shackles and their mouths stuffed with raw cotton. The only witness was a quiet, enslaved woman named Esperanza de Lima, found humming a Portuguese lullaby while sharpening kitchen knives. When questioned, she spoke only one phrase in broken English: "Justice burns slower than coal, but burns complete." The official colonial records of the incident, which became known as the Grayfield Massacre, were immediately sealed by order of Governor Robert Johnson, remaining buried in Charleston's archives for over 2 centuries. This is the story of how a woman considered nothing more than property orchestrated one of the most calculated acts of revenge in colonial American history, a story of vengeance so methodical it fundamentally altered how the entire colony viewed their human property. A plan forged in hell. The story of the Grayfield Massacre begins 15 years earlier in 1701. The colony of South Carolina was experiencing unprecedented prosperity, built on the backs of enslaved Africans working the vast rice plantations that stretched along the coastal lowlands. Among the most successful planters was Edmund Grayfield, a man of exceptional cruelty who had earned a reputation for breaking slaves both physically and mentally. His plantation, the Grayfield Estate, was the unofficial meeting place for a group of 14 elite landowners known as the Rice Council. These men saw themselves as kings of their domains, systematically evil, treating human beings as nothing more than agricultural equipment, to be used and discarded as economics dictated. In September of that year, a Portuguese slave ship arrived in Charleston Harbor, carrying 180 souls from the coast of Angola. Among them was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, who was given the name Esperanza de Lima. What the white colonists couldn't see was that she was the daughter of a powerful village chief, trained from childhood in strategy, negotiation, and an intricate understanding of human psychology. She had witnessed her family's destruction, and in her mind, every white face she encountered was connected to that original sin. Edmund Grayfield purchased her, and from her first day at the estate, Esperanza began a 15-year campaign of meticulous planning. She learned English quickly, but feigned a limited understanding, moving silently as a shadow through the Grayfield home. She listened, watched, and remembered every slight, every cruelty, and every secret spoken in hushed conversations. Her plan for revenge was set in motion not by the general brutality of slavery, but by a personal act of specific cruelty. After 14 years of servitude, Esperanza had found love with another enslaved man named Guame. They had built a sophisticated intelligence network, planning a coordinated uprising to free hundreds of slaves. But in 1716, Edmund Grayfield shattered their hope. He decided to use Esperanza for a breeding program and sold Guame to another plantation. In that moment, Esperanza's mind shifted. She saw that their planned escape would only save 2 lives, leaving the brutal system intact. She chose a different path, to send a message, so terrifying it would be remembered forever: the Last Supper of the Rice Council. On June 23, 1716, Esperanza de Lima began the final phase of her plan. She had spent weeks studying the patterns of the monthly Rice Council meetings, noting every detail, from seating arrangements to personal habits. Most importantly, she had been secretly studying the estate's enormous coal-burning furnace, imported from Britain and capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. As the 14 council members arrived, Esperanza served them with her usual quiet efficiency. The men, including Edmund Grayfield and men like Marcus Sutton, who specialized in seasoning slaves with psychological torture, debated their business with the casual brutality they always did. They discussed profitable new breeding programs, new methods of torture, and the sale of older slaves to Spanish territories. At 9:47 p.m., After dinner and drinks, the men began to feel dizzy. Esperanza had added a mixture of local herbs to their brandy, a substance designed to render them unconscious for several hours. One by one, they collapsed. With methodical efficiency, Esperanza worked through the house, using the very same iron shackles and chains that had been used to restrain thousands of slaves. She dragged each unconscious body to the kitchen, arranging them in a circle around the blazing furnace. Their hands were bound behind their backs, and their mouths were stuffed with raw cotton. The reckoning. As the sun rose on June 24th, the men of the Rice Council regained consciousness, fully aware of their predicament. They were bound and helpless, trapped in a superheated room with a woman they had treated as subhuman. Esperanza, sitting calmly in the corner sharpening kitchen knives, addressed each man by name, recounting the specific acts of cruelty she had witnessed or heard described. She forced them to confront their crimes, reading entries from Edmund Grayfield's ledger, a cold record of lives destroyed, families separated, and human beings reduced to monetary calculations. The psychological torment was followed by physical retribution. Using long iron rods, she began applying a more immediate form of justice. The screaming that echoed from the estate kitchen was unlike anything the enslaved workers in the fields had ever heard. The terrified cries of men who had never experienced genuine helplessness. Esperanza worked with purpose, using her knowledge of anatomy to inflict maximum pain without causing immediate death. She wanted them to fully experience what it meant to be property. As evening approached, she began the final act. She dragged the men closer to the furnace, positioning them to slowly cook in the unbearable heat, a technique she had heard Marcus Sutton describe. Edmund Grayfield, the last to succumb, begged for his life, offering money and freedom. Esperanza looked at him with the same detached evaluation he had used when inspecting slaves. "You are not superior," she replied. "You are just a man who chose to be evil. And now you are paying the price for that choice." The unstoppable fire. When the plantation overseers discovered the scene, they found 14 charred corpses and a woman who showed no remorse. The colonial authorities, terrified that the story would inspire other rebellions, covered up the truth. They blamed a tragic fire and sealed the official records. Esperanza was to be sold to Spanish traders and sent to the brutal silver mines of South America, a fate universally understood to be a slow death sentence. However, rumors persisted that she had made a deal to be smuggled to Spanish Florida, a sanctuary for escaped slaves. Whether she truly escaped or her story became a legend, the psychological damage was already done. The truth had escaped through other channels. In the months that followed, a wave of unrest swept through the slave communities of South Carolina. While there were no additional mass killings, plantations experienced a series of suspicious fires, poisoned livestock, and mysterious accidents. The owners, who had once moved with casual arrogance, now traveled with armed escorts and avoided predictable routines. Their meetings were suspended indefinitely, and some even began modifying their treatment of slaves, not out of moral awakening, but from practical fear. The fire that began in one kitchen spread to many. Esperanza de Lima's name became a symbol of resistance. Her story whispered from parent to child. Justice burns slower than coal, but burns complete. The masters were no longer confident in their absolute power, and the slaves were no longer convinced of their absolute powerlessness. In that fundamental shift of psychological balance lay the seeds of everything that would follow, a persistent resistance that would eventually contribute to the destruction of the entire plantation system. The Grayfield estate kitchen, a place of such horrific reckoning, was eventually abandoned and left to ruin. But its lesson remained, passed down through generations of enslaved families. It was a brutal reminder that those who choose to treat other human beings as property do so at their own peril. For property can think, property can plan, and sometimes property fights back. The kitchen at Grayfield Estate stood empty for decades, a ruin where no one dared work, until it was finally torn down. But the lesson of that night endured. Esperanza de Lima's fire born of methodical vengeance, did more than just consume 14 men. It ignited a fear in the hearts of slave owners that their human property could think and plan and remember everything. It proved that justice, while often delayed, could arrive with a terrible and complete finality. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Or are there still secrets buried in the archives of our nation's dark history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the untold stories that shaped our world, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Join us as we continue to uncover the truths that history tried to hide.